Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another Ninja One live stream. I am Jonathan Crow. I'm the Director of Community here at Ninja One, and I'm very excited to jump into session 2 after mission session 1 of our series here in the month of May, MayPI. Couldn't quite figure out the right way to spell this in a way that people would immediately get it. But anyway, MayPI, we're obviously focusing on API usage. Why is this a valuable thing for you to learn in your own tech career? What can you get out of knowing how to utilize APIs? We covered a lot of that in our first week session that was with Josh Adcock, one of our great community members. And this time around, we've brought two different guests. We have Mikey O'Toole, homosexual, in our Discord community, and also prolific in various other communities as well, including Halos and has an awesome blog that I'll be dropping a link to here in a second. And then we also have Charlie Schisler, and Charlie is the system administrator at Renaissance IT Consulting. Also a very active member of our Discord. Both of these guys, you've seen their names. If you're in our Discord, you see them contributing all the time. They contribute scripts. They help out with tons of answers to questions, and really appreciate you guys taking the time to join us here live on a stream and walk through kind of your journey. How have you guys stumbled into or intentionally walked into, okay, we want to be utilizing APIs? My guess is a few of these things have come from things you wish you had the ability to do natively in products like Ninja One, and that's kind of led you down this path. So wanting to know kind of what you guys are doing, and then also dive into some specific examples. And folks tuning in, thank you for taking time out of your day. Ben, nice to see you, buddy. Yes, MayPI. Ha ha ha. Let us know in the comments. What do you guys want to see? Definitely don't wait till the end. Ask your questions as they come. So with that, let's hand it over to you, Mikey, to start things off. Why don't you give a little introduction for anyone who somehow isn't familiar with you and your contributions and everything? Give a brief introduction, and then talk about why you thought this is a good topic to really share with folks.
So I fell into the IT world entirely accidentally. I have no professional qualifications in IT, and most of the time I genuinely have no clue what I'm talking about. Fake it till you make it really is a way of life. My background's in law, not IT. So we work predominantly with nonprofits. That's our shtick. That's our thing. It's always been our thing. It's why I started the business in the first place. Was nonprofit IT. That's been the focus. And part of that in the early days really kind of involved trying to keep our tooling costs low so that our per user costs stay low, which led to me doing this kind of, we'll build as much as we can ourselves. So our first kind of PSA and RMM link was Dynamics 365 into what was that? What at the time was CentraStage. So like we had a custom link between our PSA Dynamics 365 and CentraStage, and it was horrific and it was flaky, and it required me to essentially self-teach their horrific APIs. So Microsoft's Dynamics API before Graph and CentraStage's API, which pre-Datto, pre-Autotask was a thing to behold. So I self-taught myself how to deconstruct APIs, accessible and otherwise. Public API, private API. What's the difference? I've got a token. Have token will poke. So from that, I then, when we switched to Halo PSA, kind of still had this appreciation for APIs. And that's kind of when it took off publicly. And I started really sharing stuff. And that was kind of Luke Whitelock, who now works for Ninja. Seriously, best hire. Like, if you wanted anyone to run your kind of documentation and ITSM tooling, Luke was the guy to pick. You guys were lucky to snap him up when you did. But yeah, Luke and I started collaborating on a Halo API module, released that publicly as an open source thing. And then I kind of started poking the Ninja API. I realized no one had published a module for that in PowerShell and decided, well, I need it, so let's do it. And here we are. I've somehow managed to convince a section of the IT world that I'm an expert on APIs, and I get invited to cool things like this where I get to talk about APIs, and secretly I don't have a clue what I'm doing. So just listen to Charlie.
Oh boy, so modest. So check this out, though. I want to share this with folks. So this is I dropped a link into it. This is Mikey's blog, and obviously, Mikey, you get requests for more posts and more sharing all the time. The more you share, the more people want things. But you've gone through, and I mean, as you can see, you're sharing solutions that you found, that you've managed to connect things together, and that you're solving the issues that you're facing with your own business there. And you're being incredibly kind and thoughtful enough to share all these things, right? So even going into undocumented Microsoft 365 API things, and then also walking through how to actually put this to use, what I think is very cool, like in a more agnostic way with whatever tools, and then also using Ninja and specific tools as well. So wanted to thank you for doing that, and I understand you're modest, but I think you definitely have your requests and your following for a reason.
Yeah, part of it's modesty, part of it's a bit of imposter syndrome that's always there, and part of it really is the kind of the broader realization for anyone that, like, you can do, like, anyone can do this. It really doesn't require much more than interest, passion, and just that little bit of pig-headedness that we all have in IT, that little bit of stubbornness. Like, no, API, you will not beat me. I will keep hammering you until you give me what I need.
Well, that's awesome. And let's put your theory there to the test. Let's arm everyone here who's watching and who's going to be watching the recording. It's going to be up on YouTube later. Let's give them what they need to really make that a less painful process. Okay, so Charlie, over to you before we dive into some examples here.
Sure. My name's Charlie. As Jonathan said, I work for Renaissance IT. My title right now is kind of in limbo. I'm technically a system admin, but also automation engineer. I fell into IT by mistake as well. I've been in IT for about 7 years now. I've been programming probably for about 25, off and on. But as far as APIs go, I really started falling in love with them right when I started IT, because I realized, I need more information. I need it in a structure that I can consume, instead of, what might be given to me. And from there, I really just started poking around. I also like to say I don't really know what I'm doing. In some aspects, I do. But as Mikey can attest, I've gone to him several times, asked for help. And he's done the same. So, we've bounced off each other before, and I think it's a good collaboration. Mikey likes to handle PowerShell. I'm really into .NET and C#. So most of what I focus on as far as talking to APIs will really center around, wrapping them in C# to making easily consumable, whether in a desktop or a web app or an Azure function, something like that. But yeah.
Let's talk about this before. I know people are anxious to get into some meaty examples here, but before we do that, you mentioned your role being on an automation engineer in your team there. How central would you say knowing how to work with APIs is to that?
It's pretty pivotal. I mean, I cannot do my job without being able to glue different APIs together, essentially, right? Because, there might be an integration between, let's say, Ninja and Halo, or between Halo and Hoodoo, right? But that might not give me the functionality that I actually need. So, being able to communicate with the APIs, concurrently even, to make changes, to upload files, it's really, really important to do what I need to do.
Gotcha. And what are some of the when you were learning this? Were you learning this through basically peers, your own work, training? Where were you going to? Where were you go to resources?
So for me, I would say always the number one resource is actually documentation. As far as, how does this specific API work? Now, as far as APIs in general, that has been a very, very long journey. Using tools like Postman, Insomnia now, Bruno, small API clients that are sort of outside like a specific language are really key in trying to, poke an API. Hey, is my authentication or authorization working? Am I calling the endpoint correctly with the correct method name? Am I posting the right body? Am I missing query params? Stuff like that. Those really helped me a lot in trying to, wrap these APIs, communicate with them, etc.
Nice. And I understand you've got you mentioned in our prep call that you've got some resources, some links to things. And so I wanted to encourage you to drop those in now, and we can pull up some things on screen if you want to. We also got a question from Jake, which we can hit right off the bat. And Mikey, I don't know if you want to take this one first, or Charlie. Mikey, since I called out the undocumented API thing, maybe you want to hit this one, and then Charlie, you can jump in too.
Yeah, so it's a great question, Jake. For the most part, for me, I will tend to start by like using whatever system I'm poking. So I'll pick an example from recently. Microsoft have got a fairly what's the highest praise I can heap on it? Okay, API in Graph. But there is massive chunks of functionality missing. So we were looking to streamline how we assign Teams phone numbers. We're all in on Teams phone, mostly because non-profits being the focus. No brainer, like £3 a month for Teams phone. Nothing else is even comparatively priced. So we wanted to be able to assign phone numbers, but also report on assigned phone numbers in Teams phone configuration. None of it is in Graph. Nothing to do with Teams phones in Graph. So looking through the Teams admin center, we're able to see the API calls it's making. Then we looked at the Teams PowerShell module that Microsoft published and realized it's using the same APIs, which kind of gave us, okay, so we can authenticate to this thing with a non-interactive token, which is key for automation. You don't want to have to base your automation around someone physically logging in, because that's just a recipe for things breaking. So then we started doing tasks in the browser, pulling a list of users with all their phone numbers, capture what the browser request is doing in the developer tools in the network tab. And then we're able to reproduce that in PowerShell, or in our case for this, because we wanted to kind of be able to pull these lists on a scheduled basis. We threw it into N8N, which is a Node JavaScript-based automation platform. So we're able to make kind of arbitrary HTTP requests. So yeah, we reverse engineered this API from the browser. And I think most of the undocumented APIs we're using, like the one that we pull Office versions for that's on the blog, where we pull the latest Office version, we just, again, same thing. Go to the Office admin center in the browser and we kind of, right, what are you doing under the hood? And okay, there's an API here. Can I use that? And we latched onto that. There are always the frustrating circumstances where we look at something, a system we need to admin, and it's not doing something we can reverse engineer. So the key thing for like an undocumented API is you may approach something thinking, maybe I can do this with an undocumented API. You won't always be able to. You will hit things where you will invest the time in trying to reverse engineer something and hit a point where you just can't do it. Either you need interactive authentication, or it only works in a browser because it's doing, host fingerprinting. We've hit the APIs where actually we just can't automate around them. Those are the frustrating ones. But yeah, usually I'd say 99% of our reverse engineering is in the browser. and the remaining 1% is either really obscure blog posts where someone's posted in I don't know, what was the one we found one for one endpoint in the Teams API that we needed to access to assign phone numbers. And one Microsoft sysadmin had kind of blogged about it in Finnish on a blog that I still don't know how we actually found it. We found a blog in Finnish that talked about this endpoint, and then kind of Google Translate / Bing Translate co-piloted it back into some form of English, which was enough to tell us how the endpoint sort of worked, and then just kept poking it from there until it did what we needed. And now we can automatically do, like, we pull a list of Teams phone numbers into a custom table in Halo, and our customers can go into their portal, choose the user, choose from the list of available phone numbers, and assign, and it sends that to NAN, which sends it to the Teams API. So we no longer have to do manual phone number assignment for Teams Phone. It's all automated and customer driven, which is our goal for automation. You know, our goal for automation really is, like, A, empower our customers to self-serve, but B, we are a team who will very happily tell our customers the ideal situation for us is we don't talk to you and you don't talk to us. That's the ideal way our contracts run, is maybe we'll have a meeting every now and then just so you remember we exist. But otherwise, if nobody interacts, we're doing well.
Thanks, Mikey. And also, I mean, hey, points to the importance of blogging. So thank you, Finnish person, wherever you are.
Yeah, absolutely. If you come across something really obscure, find somewhere to share it, just because, like, you will be that person eventually who Googles a really obscure problem and finds the solution. But you'll also be the person who Googles a really obscure problem, finds someone who has done the worst thing possible in the IT world, which is when you posted your problem, and then you come back a few weeks later and say, solved it, and do nothing else. Don't be that person. That person sucks. Be the person who shares what they learned.
All right. Thank you for that. And Ben, thank you, my friend, for chiming in here and telling us what you're looking for. So, last week, discussion was broad. This week, we're jumping right into reverse engineering undocumented APIs. And so, is there maybe we do need to back up a little bit and jump in connection basics and things like that. Who wants to chime in here? And is there anything? Would this be helpful to show some visuals? I'm not sure. Charlie,
let me see if I have an example.
Okay, perfect.
I mean, as far as basics intro, no matter what tool you're using, you're going to be communicating over what's called REST. It's going to be all HTTP requests. You're going to want to know the different HTTP methods that exist, right? There's GET, there's POST, there's PUT, there's PATCH. Not many people use that one. There's DELETE. You're going to want to know
encoding types, critical for, like, authentication and connecting. Most of your requests with a REST API are going to be like JSON text format, except authentication. Typically, one of your authentication requests is going to be like an XWW form encoded request where you actually send your authentication credentials. If you get that wrong, none of your authentication happens. Sometimes you'll get a great API that documents that request type. Ninja's documentation currently does. Sometimes you'll get a documentation that just assumes you already know this thing, like Halos, and it's like, yeah, you just send this authentication payload. Doesn't tell you, like, the body type that you're supposed to use. And, like, if, like me at the time, like, that's one of your first APIs, you're like, oh, maybe it's just JSON? Question mark? Nope. So yeah, request types, very important to understand for sure.
You're also going to want to know about headers. A lot of the times when you're authenticating, whether it's through full OAuth or just through an API key, what that's going to look like is you actually adding a header to a request body. Typically, it'll be called, like, authorization, or it'll be called like API key.
Demo this actually. Let me share a screen. So PowerShell window. I'm going to use a pre-made help method. If you feel like stealing the credentials from this, it's fine. You're going to see an access token. If you happen to grab it from the screen recording, by the time you can do anything with it, it's not going to work. And this is a testing Ninja instance. So, you break it, I'm sending Ninja after you.
Mikey has operated and he's been the chat person before.
So this is like a pre-formatted PowerShell request through my module that does an authentication. And it's in verbose mode. So it's spitting out what it's doing as it goes. So what we're doing is we're making
Hey, Mikey.
token request to Ninja's token endpoint, and we're giving them the client secret, client ID, the grant type that we want to use to authenticate, and some scopes.
Sorry to interrupt you, Mikey, but I'll say this: it's for Ben, not me. Can you make this a little larger by any chance?
Yes.
Thank you so much.
So yeah, we're giving Ninja client secret, client ID, grant type. These are common to what we would call an OAuth 2 API. Which is probably the most common type of API you're going to hit. It's definitely the most common out there at the moment. Graph is an OAuth API, Ninja, Halo, Autotask. You may occasionally hit a SOAP API. Run away or ask someone who's not me, because I don't get involved in those very often. So what we're doing is we're making a post request, which is one of the types that Charlie mentioned, to Ninja's token API, which then gives us back this access token. This access token is what we send in a header to make our subsequent API request. So this is what tells the API that we have authenticated and that we're allowed to do things within these scopes. And we get the type of token. You'll commonly see bearer. You may see other types. So then when we make subsequent requests, we're going to send this bearer token in a header to the API, and that's what's going to authenticate us. Typically, your tokens have a really short expiry. In this case, 33,600 seconds. So around an hour. So you can refresh this token as needed, depending on what type of authentication you're doing. For automation, client credentials is going to be your go-to wherever you can, because it's non-interactive. There's another really common authentication method that's called authorization code, which is an interactive authentication type. Those less useful for automation, because at some point someone has to log in and probably go through multi-factor authentication, for example. This is being run on PowerShell 7.40 or 7.5 maybe on a Windows 11 machine currently. This is just on my desktop PC. I tend to do they've been a mixture of containers, virtual machines, and on my machine, depending on what I'm feeling like. Just a bit of call out, like I think David has mentioned it in the chat, but yeah, keep your credentials safe. So in my case, I'm pulling all the authentication information out of Azure secret vaults. So no authentication information is actually being stored on my machine beyond the temporary access token that's valid for an hour. In terms of from what devices am I performing API requests in general? For dev, my machine. For production automation, a mixture. NAN, Halo runbooks directly. Sometimes PowerShell for kind of ad hoc reporting stuff. Some custom Azure function stuff. I'm sure Charlie's also got where are you running your automations, Charlie? Where do you tend to run?
Most of ours run through either Azure Functions, which I've been actually migrating away from. We're also utilizing Roost a lot.
Cool. So. Yeah, Roost is a pretty powerful API kind of automation platform. Again, as from what I understand, you have the ability to make more or less ad hoc API requests, as well as they pre-built a bunch.
Yeah, I mean, Roost has sort of pre-built integrations, as they'll call them, one of which is Ninja. It's really easy to use. If there's an action, as they would call it, that's not available, you can make generic API requests using the same authentication. And then you can also do something like import an open API spec and sort of create your own integration. One thing I do want to touch on, though, is I see a lot of people in Discord and in other places as well. They ask the same question: where do we run it? Because a lot of times they want to actually run it on end user workstations, right? To, let's say, update a custom field or something like that. I think Mikey would agree with me here that that's something you really want to avoid unless absolutely necessary. You really don't want to expose any sort of authentication, token or secret on end user workstations, just in case they get compromised for some reason, right? Typically, what I'll suggest, just as Mikey does and what I used to do, create an Azure function. You can basically expose your own API and have your own authentication method front load the actual API calls that you're trying to make. And that way they're scoped. They can only do one particular thing. And it's quite a bit safer in my opinion.
Yeah, 1,000%. And in some ways, this will depend on what you're doing with the API. If you're just reading information and you can do so in a rather narrowly scoped way, or it's an API that's unauthenticated, like I have a couple of scripts that will pull like the latest Office patch version. We'll run that on a per machine basis because we're pulling from an unauthenticated public API source. So there's no security risk at all in that. For other APIs, you can sometimes, if you absolutely have to. So like we have a custom help desk form that posts to Halo. We will run that on end user machines because we can scope an API key so it can only create a ticket, which the users can do from the portal anyway. So it's doing something they have permission to do anyway with an API key that is so narrowly scoped that there's no leakage beyond what they could get anyway. Other APIs like Ninja's API has a lot of surface area, but actually it's very difficult to restrict what you can do with a Ninja API key. They are very broad in that you can kind of scope an API key that can read basically everything, write basically everything, or control basically everything, and scoping within that is difficult. So yeah, we definitely wouldn't want a Ninja API key anywhere near an endpoint because locking them down is harder. And that's common across APIs. Ninjas is, you will have APIs on the Halo or Graph side where you have an inescapably huge list of possible scopes and you can narrow an API key down so that it can do, just about one thing. Or, and I would say more APIs will fit on this side, you have a very kind of small list of quite broad scopes that you can restrict to. So yeah, safest option is not to put them near endpoints unless and you've thoroughly gone through like the possible security implications and you're comfortable that actually you're giving them access they have already.
Awesome. Thank you, Mikey. And thanks, Ben, for getting us down this path. And keep those questions coming. Charlie, going back to you, is there anything that your recent work or anything that you've put together that you felt was particularly useful and everything that maybe folks can get ideas from, or that you can kind of walk through?
I do have an example that actually was asked in Discord yesterday.
Cool.
And it's a pretty basic one, but someone asked, are they really positive that they weren't able to grab the BitLocker key essentially from the Ninja API, and they wanted to pull this, from documentation. So, we ran into this before. We used to use IT Glue. We actually migrated over to Hoodoo. There are some great scripts to do that, but we've sort of moved away from that model. Like I said, we've been migrating everything to Roost. But really, our whole thought process in this to make it easy to grab those is to do. There's basically two components, right? The first one is let's get the actual BitLocker recovery key and let's put it into a secure custom field in Ninja, and that's pretty simple. You can run a PowerShell script, periodically, or you can do it through, a condition. I would suggest on, a scheduled basis, to really grab that for, the system drive, and then just write it to that field. When you create the field, make sure that it's at least readable by API, so that you can actually grab it. And then from there, what we actually do on the Roost side is we have an action that runs, I believe it's once a day now. We're trying not to hammer our APIs too hard. And it'll go through every organization, and then it'll go through every single device. It will pull that custom field, as well as the host name of the machine, and basically create a new password entry in Hoodoo. And we're not really concerned if there's duplicates. There shouldn't be duplicates. We do a little check, but it's not too complex. And from there, we have the recovery key stored, one in Ninja in its native location, under the drives, I believe it's called. We also have it in the custom field, and then we have it in Hoodoo, and then we also perform an upload to Azure, if possible. So that's one example where you can utilize API to really just sort of make your life easier as far as syncing information between two different places.
Yeah, we have a similar kind of thing for like autopilot hardware hashes. So we have a bit of PowerShell that's in the Discord. If you're not in the Discord, you should be. But we have a little bit of PowerShell in the Discord that pulls the autopilot hardware hash into Ninja. Then we pull that out of Ninja's API into Halo. And then we have a custom workflow in NAN now that sends those, checks them against devices that are in tune for the customer. And if one's missing, it just autopilot, puts the device straight into autopilot with the hardware hash. All kind of driven from a Ninja custom field and a bit of PowerShell that's running through Ninja on the endpoints. And it's one of those things where Ninja, not to blow too much smoke up Ninja's butt, but it's one of those things where Ninja's reliability when running PowerShell scripts on devices compared to other RMMs just opens up a lot more possibility for automation.
Believe me, we'll take the compliment, but work is always to be done. So any of these things, are either of you guys thinking about doing them API contests? So for folks, I mean, I get the feeling a lot of the folks here watching, you're members of the Discord and everything already. But we are doing, as part of this API month, next week we're going to be doing another session where we're going to be going through, having some Ninja internal folks walking through some use cases with the Ninja One public API in particular. And we're doing a contest. And so this is open to anybody. It's open until the end of the month, so you've got some time, a couple of weeks to work on something. And if you want to submit, it's in the Discord. We'll drop a link, and submit a use case, and we'll have some judges voting on this, and the winner is going to get a Switch 2, which don't ask me how I had to get it, but all right. So Ben, let's see. Thanks for driving this, Ben. Can we please go through the different application platforms, please? So I think we listed Robert. Robert. Geez, Robert got in my head with the comment there. Charlie, you mentioned you were kind of going through a few of them that you were listening to.
Are we talking about the application platforms within Ninja?
Yeah, I think the drop down, web to web, SPA.
I'm gonna let Mikey take this one. He knows a little bit more off than me.
Yeah. Let me just get logged into Ninja here.
And yeah, sorry, I misread that question. I thought it was not Ninja specific. I thought he was talking about.
So what's interesting is it both is and isn't Ninja specific.
Okay.
In that there are some of the terms Ninja are using here are very commonly reused for other OAuth APIs, but they don't actually they're not as important as they sometimes might seem as a thing. So let me share my screen and we can see what Benjamin's talking about. Just because it's a kind of it'll come up as well with other things. Like you'll see it in Graph when you're creating a Graph app. It has a similar sort of how are you using the API. So this essentially, it's nothing more than a shortcut. So it will predetermine some information in the next steps based on how you've indicated you're going to use the API. It's not strictly going to lock you in to one pathway, but it is going to kind of hint to the API you're using, in this case Ninja, how you're planning to use it. So native tends to indicate that you're going to use it in a scenario where you're going to present the API connection directly to the user. So you're going to do interactive authentication, and you're going to pull the token back within the same request. So you're not going to redirect to a different web application. So it'll predetermine that you're probably going to do authorization code, and you're probably going to want offline access. So it'll pre-select a scope and it'll pre-select the type of authentications you're allowed to use for this app. Single page envisions a web scenario. So you're going to make a post request to Ninja's authentication endpoint, and then Ninja's going to redirect you back to your web application with a token. Web, again, same scenario. Single page versus web means less now, but usually single page is purely redirect. Web will allow you to also do client credentials, so non-interactive auth. And API services will just do client credentials. That's like fully unattended auth. I'm just going to give you a client ID and a secret, and you're going to give me a token. Typically, what you'll find is interactive is more permissive. So interactive will allow you to impersonate a user in a lot of systems, including Graph and Ninja, whereas non-interactive auth tends to restrict a little what you can do because you're behaving as the application, not as a user. So in Ninja's example, if you want to run trigger scripts on an endpoint, you have to do interactive auth. You cannot run a script on an endpoint doing machine-to-machine auth client credentials. The water gets a little muddier when you do refresh token, because you can do a refresh token for both client credentials and interactive auth, but a refresh token inherits the type of whatever refresh token you gave it. So when you do client credentials auth, you can get a refresh token. When you exchange that for a new access token, it's still a client credentials token. If you do an interactive auth session, when you exchange that refresh token, it's still an interactive session. So this is how sometimes, like with the Teams API we reverse engineered, can only do interactive auth. But if we do interactive auth once, we can keep refreshing that token. As long as we use it once a day, we can keep that refresh token alive. And I think we're up to like 400 days now where we've just been kind of, we just have a little job in NAN that just exchanges that token once a day, just makes a dummy request once in the morning at 6 a.m. for all the phone numbers, just so that it refreshes the token for the day ahead. So sometimes you can work around the limitations of interactive auth. Not that I would recommend doing so, because that's totally presents some weird security problems, but do it. It's fine. Ninja will also, if you have a conversation with support and your account manager, if you need longer interactive sessions in Ninja have the concept of sliding refresh tokens. So that's, as long as you use the refresh token, you can keep your interactive session valid in the same way. You have to ask for it to be turned on. They will only turn it on for one API application that you specifically request. You can have multiple in your instance, but you have to request each one separately. And they'll make you understand kind of that what you're committing to and what the limitations are. It is useful. It's how we trigger scripts from Halo in Ninja, is we have kind of an interactive token that we just keep refreshing. So as long as you're using it responsibly, it's worth doing for Ninja if you need to do stuff that's interactive only. But yeah, application platforms, Ben, they don't necessarily mean as much as they appear to. They really are just pre-filling, pre-hinting what you do. That works the same in Ninja, it works the same in Graph, it works the same in Halo API. When you select the application type, it's going to pre-prompt what it thinks you need to fill in, whether you need to give a redirect URL, what scopes are available. One thing Ninja does that you do need to watch out for, which isn't common across all API platforms, in Graph, you can select web and you can still go and turn on client credentials. In Ninja, if you select certain application types, you won't see some boxes on the next screen. So if you select, I couldn't log into my test instance, so you're looking at our live instance. So I'm not going to proceed to any other screens, which is why it's just on the drop down. But in Ninja, if you select certain ones of these, you will lose options on the next page. So you won't be able to select certain scopes. So just if you get to a point where you select one, you go to the next page and you're like, oh, why can't I do interactive auth? Go back and select a different app type. Go back and select a different application platform, because it's just removed a checkbox because of what you've told it. Anything? Did I miss anything?
Something I want to mention really quick. You talked about, essentially spoofing the user when, you're doing something like authorization code flow. I would really recommend, if you're going to go that route, that you create a separate user, like physical user, because in Ninja specifically, whichever account that you use to authorize that key with, that's going to be the one that's going to show as being making all the changes, right? So for instance, in our Roost, we use authorization code flow. And my boss did it with his personal account. So now I've been meaning to change it. But now if you look at our activity feed in Ninja, basically the entire thing is just he made changes.
So that's how
about 100 he made changes. Yeah,
that's how he keeps those metrics high for looking like he's working.
Yeah, that's right.
Some platforms, Halo, for example, have this concept of like API only users. So like you create a user that the API impersonates. So everything, as you said, Charlie, those audit trails attach clearly to the API. For platforms that don't have that kind of inherent concept, as you said, create a dummy user to do it, but make it clear like that it's an API. And also, if you're creating an API user, there's no point just creating one and calling it API, because that doesn't give you anything in your audit log. So like you want, like in Ninja, for example, API _ Halo PSA at your MSP.com, so that like, okay, this action was made via the API. Immediately I can see, and I know what application it came from. And get yourself in a good habit of like, don't cross those tokens over. Don't, just because it's convenient, take that Halo token and put it into Roost to save you creating a new one. Create the extra API user. If you're in a platform that happens to charge you per user and they don't have free API users, yeah, you may have to combine users. It's going to pollute your audit trail. And honestly, the purist in me says get rid of those platforms. Like it's 2025. Platform interoperability and like interconnection between platforms is massive for MSPs. If you're not picking your tools and eliminating tools based on the quality of their API, you need to start. It's a key. Like if we're deciding on a new tool, what their API looks like is a key driver.
If they even have one, and that's a big thing for us right now, is determining when we're looking at new tooling. Do you have one, first of all? Because guess what? A lot of them don't. And secondly, what does it look like? How easy it is? How easy is it going to be to actually communicate with it? And what can I actually do with the API, right? Because if all I can do is, pull a bunch of information, but I can't actually, modify anything, sometimes that can be useful, but sometimes that's, essentially useless. Like you might as well not have one at that point.
Yeah. We were looking at a DMARC tool recently, and we were comparing two tools. And one of them was like, we have an API, we're not planning to iterate on it anytime soon, and you can read everything. All the reports, all the domains you've got configured, you can just read everything, but that's it. The other one was like, we don't have an API yet. We have one in internal kind of alpha state. We have documentation I can show you for it, so you know it's coming. It'll be out within the next 2 quarters, but it's a full read-write API across everything. We went with platform 2 on the understanding that like we'll sign our contract, but if you don't have that API by the end of next quarter, we have a break clause. But like the ability to control a platform through the API is so important. Like read only, yes, it can be useful, but actually in the grand scheme of things, if you can't fully control through the API, it doesn't compare to read write. It really doesn't.
So in order to figure that out, I mean, aside from just asking directly, I mean, you're looking for documentation or...
Yeah, you're looking for documentation. There is, you know, much as I really do love, I love a vendor where I don't actually have to talk to anyone. There's sometimes no substitution for asking, because lots of them don't have public API docs or easily discoverable API docs. But actually, like some of the best documented APIs we work with, we had to ask them for the documentation link, and once they gave it to us, they always get the feedback of please make this more discoverable. But actually, like, yeah, incredible API documentation. It's just, you know, impossible to find unless you make a dark eldritch ritual to a wizard. Sometimes ask, but search as well.
Awesome. Okay, so we've got about closing in on 10 minutes left, and so I want to make sure that everyone watching, Ben, you've been having great questions. You got any more? How should we spend this last 10 minutes? Mike, I don't know if there's anything else that you would like to show. I do want to call out, I want to make sure we call out one thing in particular. I'm going to share my screen. Not for anything that I have done.
Cool API work now.
Let's see. Here we go. I wanted to show this. So, Charlie, putting you on the spot here.
Oh, no.
No, you've done some work here that you're sharing with the world. And so I wanted just to get your thoughts about, you know, what was this project that you're creating, and how are you utilizing it right now?
Oh boy. So when we signed back up for Ninja, actually at my previous MSP, we used Ninja. I moved them away. Ninja was a very different product back then.
Sure.
But we're back, and I love Ninja. But I saw that the API had improved significantly.
Oh man, that V1 API.
Yeah, it was a bunch of GET requests. Oh, you could delete alerts. Sorry. Anyway, I really wanted to start, you know, looking at more automation. I was actually aware of Mikey's PowerShell module, which is great, and I recommend anyone to use it. If you know, whenever someone comes into the Discord, and they start poking around in PowerShell, and I'm like, look, Mikey created this great thing, you know, just try it out. But anyway, I wanted to start doing Azure functions. I like PowerShell. I don't love PowerShell. I'm more of a C# kind of guy. Controversial opinion in this room, maybe.
What's PowerShell? But you know, really verbose C# anyway under the hood.
Yeah. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna wrap this thing myself so that I can sort of natively call and communicate with Ninja, and I can have, you know, actual enums to reference to when, say, I want to filter, you know, let's say a device based off its, you know, node type, or node class, I think it's called. You know, or, you know, I want to provide it with a list of certain devices to do something, instead of sort of relying on building these JSON, you know, request bodies or whatever myself. So I went ahead and I started work on this actually. And it's using C# and it's using something called REST#, which is actually a great library in order to talk to APIs in C# and then also handle some serialization and deserialization, as they would call it, from, you know, like a JSON response to, you know, like a native C# POCO or plain old C# classes, they would call it. I did start working on this. I implemented a bunch of stuff. There is a bunch of stuff still to go. Unfortunately, development has slowed down a little bit, and part of that is because um, when you're dealing with Azure functions, for me at least, client credentials are really easy. Authorization code, trying to do that in a C# app when you're going to run it in Azure functions, is not as easy. So I've sort of been stun locked, as one might say, and how to implement that authorization code. I've done it before in other, like libraries and stuff that I created. But I'm trying not to dictate too hard what a consumer of the library would want to do, while at the same time, steering them in the right way. So most of the stuff I've done is all like the client credential stuff. And if you want to pull from Ninja, or there are certain things you can do like alerting, maintenance mode that you can do in client credentials, it's great for that. And we have used it and we continue to use it in certain functions. For instance, servers, when they're going to restart, we actually have them call an Azure function to essentially put themselves into maintenance mode for a period of time so that we don't get alerting on it. And that's using the library. But, there's a lot of work to be done still.
But awesome that you've put this out there and that you've shared it, and folks should check it out. Just don't be understanding. Don't bug Charlie too much about the planned activities. He's doing his best here. Awesome. No, thank you for going through that, and definitely wanted to share it as a cool resource. Mikey, anything else that as we're wrapping up here that you wanted to share, or and people in the audience here, any last last call on questions or things you might like to see?
So I think just be forgiving of yourself when you're exploring APIs. You will occasionally hit a knowledge gap. You'll occasionally hit an API that just doesn't behave as well. Based off of poking that Charlie, myself, and others have done to the Ninja API, Ninja have improved error messages across the API recently. Thanks to Ninja's product managers for driving that hard. But it wasn't much more than a year ago where you would send a request to Ninja and you'd get back null pointer exception. And what Ninja's actually trying to tell you is, I don't support the authentication scheme you've used for this endpoint, but rather than saying that, which Ninja does now, you just get null pointer exception. But you can also get null pointer exception by triggering an actual null pointer exception, by doing something out of bounds of the API. So allow yourself to kind of hit cryptic errors and go and ask for help or do more research, because sometimes you'll hit things that make absolutely no sense. And actually, unless you've seen them, they're not in the documentation. There's a lot of tribal knowledge within any API. The Halo API, everything in Halo's entire web front end is driving an API that's entirely publicly accessible. About 3% of it is documented, and that documentation doesn't include the types for any of the data. Everything is a string in their documentation. But if you submit a string for half the field, you're going to get an error because they actually want an integer or they want an array. So documentation is where you should start, but you also have to understand that it's often fallible, usually automatically generated. And in theory, that sounds great. And I'm a proponent for automatic documentation generation. The documentation for the PowerShell module pulled entirely from the source code. None of it's written outside of the source files. That, of course, means that it's entirely dependent on the accuracy of my source files. Just like Ninja's API documentation is entirely dependent on the accuracy of their API spec file. Same for Halo. So the amount of time they put into these things that are often automatically generated affects the quality of the documentation. And sometimes things aren't documented. Running scripts in the Ninja API. You have to pass a run as parameter. It's not marked as required in the Ninja documentation. It is required. Ninja don't give you any idea what you have to specify for this, but it will only accept a very narrow set of values depending on what you want it to do, some of which bear no resemblance to anything you use in the API. Like if you want to run as a macOS system, you have to pass a very specific string. It's not just system like it is for Windows, it's something else. We kind of reverse engineered a few of them, and then Ninja's excellent API dev team filled in the rest of the gaps, and we posted it in Discord, so now it's available for everyone. You will hit API scenarios like that, where the information is only available in one place, and it's not the documentation. So allow yourself to hit those circumstances and go and beg the rest of the IT community for help, because someone's probably hit it. If you're the person who hits that, and you're the person who finds a thing that's not documented, and you reach out to Ninja's team and say, how does this work? If you get that answer, be the person who shares it for the next person.
Yeah.
And that way everybody gets a bit better.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up, and definitely everybody, as you're testing things out, you've got great resources like the two folks that you have on screen here, the other folks in the chat. Obviously, we're all working together, sharing things. On the Ninja One team, Josh Lambert is the product manager who is primarily involved with owning the API now. There's the API channel in Discord. You can tag him in Discord, or you can get a hold of me. Josh, you're welcome for that. And and okay, let's see. Last questions. Charlie, I want to give you a chance to say anything that you wanted to mention before we sign off too.
I guess what I would say is, don't be afraid to break things, but also be sure of what you're breaking. I have run into a few different scenarios myself where, you're calling an endpoint and maybe it's not documented so well, and you forget a query parameter, and then you delete, everything of a certain type of resource instead of just the one that you thought you were doing, right? It's good to poke around. You're going to have to do it, especially for, destructive actions or ones that, update a certain resource. But if you can, try to scope your actions, at least in the testing phase, to things that you might not care about going away or being messed up. Aside from that, have fun. It will become fun after the initial frustration, sort of subsides from, I just spent 3 hours trying to get authentication working on this thing, and I finally got it. Okay, now let's, play with the toy, right? What is the black box over my right shoulder? This is my 3D printer. Sorry about that. Yes.
I love that it's in the kitchen too. So then you can give it the food.
Charlie doesn't reuse like cooking spoons. He just prints one when he needs one.
That's right.
No dishes. He never runs the dishwasher. Okay.
We've got a filament recycler on the other side. That's what you're not seeing.
We technically don't have any time left, so I shouldn't be asking this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Can't I just ask ChatGPT and other AI platforms what I should be doing and just get all the answers?
Yes. You also have to accept, if you ask ChatGPT how to run a script on the Ninja API, it doesn't know how to pass run as. It doesn't know that run as is a required parameter because its training data includes Ninja's documentation. So, yeah, AI chatbots are a good tool for helping to understand APIs. They can also help you understand a lot of the basics of APIs, the kind of more theoretical, like how does OAuth 2 authentication requests work? They'll deconstruct that fine because that's kind of generic across most OAuth 2 APIs. What they won't do is give you that kind of internal tribal knowledge that you can either find by experimenting or you have to get from the source, or in Ninja's case, the community, because Ninja's community shares in a way that not all others do. So yeah, they're a great source, but accept that sometimes they will hallucinate. And there's a lot of stuff they don't know about because it's not public.
Well said. Charlie, anything to add there?
I think Mike said it perfectly.
All right, great.
Better than I could.
Guys, I appreciate you a ton. Thank you both so much for taking time, not just today, but you take so much time throughout all the days with giving back to the community and Discord and other places as well. So thank you both so much. Thank you everybody for joining in. Hopefully this was helpful. Recording will be up right after we close this, and then next week we're going to close out the series by having Luke Whitelock, who, like you mentioned, and Josh Lambert join in from Ninja's side and go through a little bit of examples of using the Ninja One API in particular. So stick with us for next week. Come back then. Also be thinking, utilize what you've learned today. We want to see more people playing around with the Ninja One API, developing some use cases, trying things out, ask us questions. Let's share more and help us give away that Nintendo Switch too. I had to do some crazy things to get it. All right.
Do something cool, but also like if you have nothing other than the idea,
Yes.
share the idea. Like share like, can I do this with the API? How would I approach it? Because actually, like some of the coolest stuff I've built with the API hasn't been my thought. It's David coming to me at like 2 a.m. because he can't sleep and being like, can we do this? And I'm like, sure, we can do this. And then I go and figure out how to do it. Like some of the coolest stuff I've been able to share have been the results of other people's fever dreams. Be that person.
That's such a great point. Don't feel intimidated. Don't like, oh, has to be some crazy, complicated thing that you want to put together and share. Absolutely, don't let that hold you back at all. And share ideas. That's a fantastic point, Mikey. Thank you for bringing that up. All right, everybody. Happy Wednesday, and we will see you next week. Take care.